In the previous video, I talked about two event towers that have been put back on sale and slightly rebalanced, that being the Halopunk and the Slasher Tower. Obviously, we have a third tower that's on sale, which the developers did not announce, aka the Jester Tower. But in this update, two more event towers have been modified. Interestingly enough, the Harvester Tower has been modified, which I think is the first time it's been reworked since it was first added to Tower Defense Simulator. And the Archer has changed slightly since its addition to Tower Defense, well, since its last rework actually. Not necessarily its addition to Tower Defense Simulator, because it was first called the Holiday Archer when it was first added to Tower Defense Simulator, and it's received a lot of changes over the years to the point where now it is no longer really based upon the first concept that it was first added with. With the first concept, it had piercing arrows, which didn't change directions, whereas now archers have 100% accuracy because the archer will bend, well, sorry, the arrow will bend to the whim of the enemies in play. But interestingly enough, these towers are not on sale. The Halopunk and the Slasher towers are on sale, but both the Archer and the Halopunk aren't on sale, which is even more interesting because the Archer isn't really a Halloween tower. It used to be called the Holiday Archer after all, after the holiday season, aka December, so fair enough that that's not on sale. But the Harvester I find really odd not to be on sale because its cousin, I guess, because it came from the same event, the Halopunk, is on sale for 299 Robux, which is actually less than what it was sold with. I think it was 399 Robux. So the Harvester, I think, should have been put back on sale. But alas, that's not the case. So we start off with the Harvester. Now, its placement cost has actually increased. Previously, it was 1,400, whereas now it is 1,750. So more of a mid-game tower than starting off. However, to compensate for this, the damage for the level 0 Harvester has increased from 6 to 18, whereas the fire rate for the Harvester has also increased from 1.2 to 1.75, obviously to balance out the damage increase, the massive damage increase, threefold from 6 to 18. That is, yeah, 300% more damage. But the fire rate hasn't increased all too much. It's only to 1.75. The range for the Harvester, interestingly enough, has also increased from 13 to 20. Ignore the 23 that's shown off here and all other tower range statistics because skills are enabled for me. I think I have max skills enabled for the range boost, so it is 20 now. The projectile speed remains the same at 45, so the DPS of the Harvester Tower alone has increased from 4.96 to 10.27, and the cost efficiency has decreased from 282.26 to 170.9. The cost efficiency here being lower is better. Now, this doesn't actually include the Thorns ability that the Harvester has. This is a separate DPS because of the way that it generates. So the Thorn statistics is increased from 2 to 5. The range has remained the same at 10. The duration has actually halved nearly from 8 seconds to 4.5 seconds. The slowdown has remained the same at 15%. The Thorns tick remains the same at 0.5. So overall, the damage for the Thorns for the Harvester Tower has increased from 32 to 45, which, given the fact that the Thorns actually last shorter, I think is pretty good. You're dealing more damage within a small amount of time. Basically, you're not allowing the enemies to walk out of range of the Thorns as you did previously, although that being said, 8 seconds was quite a long period of time, so I think many enemies were hard-pressed to actually stay within the Thorns, but there was slowdown. Anyways, the Thorn DPS has increased from 4 to 10, and the cost efficiency has decreased massively, actually by half, nearly, from $350 to $175. Now, you may be aware of the Harvester's secret-ish, it's more of like an open secret, the secret that it has a synergy with the Farm Tower in Tower Defense Simulator. So I do believe that the Thorns need to be generated within range of the farm. So if you were to do it here, you can see that there are extra Thorns here based on the level of the farm. They don't last as long as the Thorns from the Harvester, and in most cases you're not really placing the farm right next to the Harvester or near the path in general where towers are attacking, so for the most part we can ignore this. But I don't think it's changed too much, but it's something to know if you're using both the farm and the Harvester. Obviously it is a joke towards the fact that the Harvester harvests crops. And guess what the farm does? It produces crops, well, in its original state, in its default state. I mean, other skins, yes, there's the Elon Musk skin, so fair enough. Not all farms look like they're crops. In any case, at level 1, the upgrade price has remained the same, actually, at $650. However, because of the previous change, the damage has been buffed from 8 to 18. The fire rate, surprisingly enough, has remained the same at 1.2. The range has been increased from 15 to 20, which was a previous buff, to the Harvester at level 0. The projectile speed remains the same at 45, and for all other levels, by the way, for all levels actually, the projectile speed remains the same at 45. 45 isn't a particularly fast projectile speed, but most of the time the Harvester will hit the intended enemy, and I don't think it's affected by hitboxes, so the projectile speed isn't really too much of a factor, other than it might slightly decrease the DPS because that's not incorporated into fire rate, I don't believe. However, with that being said, the total price for the level 1 Harvester has increased from 2,050 to 2,400 because of the placement cost increase at level 0. So, the DPS for the Harvester has increased from 6.62 to 14.9, but the cost efficiency has gone from 309.67 to 161.07. Meanwhile, in terms of Thorns damage, the Thorns ability now deals 8 damage, whereas previously it dealt 4 damage. The Thorns range remains the same at 4. The Thorns duration has been nearly halved from 8 to 4.5. All other statistics remain the same, including the slowdown being at 15%. So actually, the total elapsed damage, because the Thorns now deal more damage, has increased from 64 to 72. But the DPS has increased from 8 to 16, and the cost efficiency has gone from 256.25 to 150. As for level 2, its upgrade cost has actually decreased from 2,000 to 1,800. However, in terms of the total price for the Harvester, it has still increased from 4,050 to 4,200. But the range for the Harvester has also increased from 15 to 20, a change that was made at level 1. The damage has increased from 10 to 30, so a tripling of the damage. But the fire rate has increased from 0.85 to 1.2, meaning that the Harvester now shoots more slowly. Doesn't get hidden detection at this level, but it does have flying detection from level 0. But also, there is one thing that I have actually forgotten to mention about the Harvester that it gets at level 0 as well. Because previously, the Harvester actually had a max hit limit. At level 0 and level 1, it was 2. At level 2, 3, and 4, it was 3. And at level 4, it was 4. However, the developers have made it so the Harvester is now a single hit tower, which is why the damage of the Harvester has been doubled or nearly tripled in most cases, so that it compensates for the loss of this. Now, this does mean that the Harvester is now less effective in hordes. It can only target one single high health enemy. But in most cases, because you're not really putting the Harvester at the end of a straight line, I think this is better for the Harvester, dealing slightly more damage towards one enemy. In any case, the DPS for the Harvester has increased from 11.65 to 24.83. Now again, if you consider the fact that the Harvester could hit up to 3 enemies at level 2, which is what this level is, it means that effectively you could double the DPS of the Harvester, and because the Harvester was slightly cheaper, the cost efficiency would also be slightly cheaper. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison, but DPS always assumes that the enemy, or the tower, sorry, hits one enemy. That includes explosive towers. But in this case, I think it is better the way that this Harvester tower works. Anyways, the cost efficiency has gone from 347.64 to 169.15. In terms of Thorns at level 2, it's been buffed from 6 to 10. The Thorns range remains the same at 12 here. The duration has been halved, exactly actually this time, from 10 to 5. The slowdown remains the same at 20%, the Thorns tick remains the same at 0.5, but the total elapsed damage has actually slightly decreased from 120 to 100, so the DPS, because it's shorter time for the Thorns to actually be active, it's actually increased from 12 to 20, so cost efficiency wise, even though the Harvester's Thorns actually deal less damage in total, it deals it because of the shorter duration of the Harvester's Tower's Thorns. So you're looking at an increase from 12 to 20 DPS and a cost efficiency going from 337.5 to 210. And it's worth to mention that the farm, its ability to actually generate Thorns is based on the damage that the Harvester's Thorns has. So actually, because of the buff to the Thorns, if you were to have a farm tower, the Thorns are actually now more effective from the farm tower as well, which is a very good buff. Again, I doubt many people are using the farm in conjunction with the Harvester, but it's nice to know if for some reason, I don't know, Below Natural were to live events abuse with the Harvester and the farm, saying, listen, you have these two towers, go ham, and make sure you use the synergy. Meanwhile, at level 3, the upgrade cost for the Harvester has decreased from 5,000 to 4,750, and the total cost has actually now slightly decreased from 9,050 to 8,950. So, what, a $100 decrease? That could get you, I don't know, an iPhone accessory, maybe even 2 cases on the cheapest iPhone. Yeah, not too much, actually, thinking about it. But interestingly enough, the damage has been buffed quite massively from 20 to 65, although, as mentioned previously, that's to compensate for the max hits being removed from the Harvester and it becoming a single target tower. The fire rate has also increased from 0.85 to 1.2, so the Harvester now shoots more slowly. The range also increased from 15 to 20, but that's like an outstanding change from previous levels. And the DPS has increased from 23.31 to 53.81, so a cost efficiency decrease from 388.25 to 166.33. Now, in terms of Thorns, the Thorns ability that the Harvester has, the damage has increased from 12 to 25, so nearly so over a doubling actually, thinking about it. The Thorns range remains the same at 16. The duration, as we've established, has been halved from 10 to 5. The slowdown has remained the same at 20%. In fact, the slowdown has remained the same except for the last level. The elapsed damage has actually slightly increased from 240 to 250, and the DPS has increased from 24 to 50, and a cost efficiency going from 377.08 to 179. As for level 4, remember when I said the total price for the Harvester has actually slightly decreased at level 3? Ignore that for level 4, because previously it was 8,500 to upgrade the Harvester, and now it's 10,000. So you're looking at a total price increase going from 17,550 to 18,950. But the damage for this has been buffed significantly from 30 to 105, fair enough. But the fire rate has also increased to compensate from 0.75 to 1. The range has increased from 17.5 to 23.5, and the DPS for the Harvester, interestingly enough, has increased from 39.57 to 104.17. However, do bear in mind that the Harvester could hit 3 enemies previously, so that could potentially hit up to 120 DPS if 3 enemies were hit. But in this case, again, we're not comparing apples to apples. So the cost efficiency has gone from 443.52 to 181.91. Again, so you see the Harvester is getting decent cost efficiency for level 0 to level 4, whereas previously the cost efficiency would be kind of worse towards the back end, so that's level 4 and level 5 for the Harvester, because it would always assume they would hit multiple enemies, whereas in some cases, especially during the boss battles, that would not always be the case, especially during boss battles, because there's only one enemy alive, the boss. Now, in terms of Thorns, the Thorns ability, its damage has increased from 20 to 35. The range, however, has actually decreased at this level from 18 to 16. The duration has decreased because previously it was a long 16 seconds, whereas now it's only 5.5 seconds. I think I prefer this. But that does mean that the total elapsed damage for the Thorns has decreased from 640 to 385, but the DPS has increased. I know counterintuitively, but it's increased from 40 to 70. So cost efficiency wise, you're going from 438.75 to 270.71, which again, it sounds good on paper, the DPS, but again, the Thorns last less. I mean, they last for less, so you're getting less damage out of them. And sure, yes, enemies, if it was 16 seconds, enemies wouldn't be dealt the full 640 damage that it was previously. And yeah, I guess these enemies are being dealt more damage DPS-wise, and they can stay within the Thorns for the actually allotted time that the Thorns will deal damage for. But again, it just feels like the Thorns have gotten weaker, especially if you don't time the Thorns correctly, because they last for like 5 seconds. Meanwhile, as for level 5, the Harvester Tower, its total upgrade cost, right? Well, we'll get to that. But the upgrade cost has increased from 20,000 to 37,500. Yes, but its range, as you can see, its range is just massive. So the range has increased from 22.5 to 27.5. That's like sniper levels. This is like a ground sniper, basically, except it's an event tower. And what's more, right, I think it's more of a ranger, actually, thinking about it, because its damage has increased from 90 to 875. This is the second highest damaging tower in Tower Defense Simulator in terms of actual shots. Yeah, we should actually be setting this to strongest, because 875 is only being bested by the ranger, so I guess I can understand why this upgrade cost has increased from 37,550 to 56,450. 450. But obviously the fire rate has increased from 1.5 to 3.5. Fair enough, its damage has massively increased. And the range, it does have a massive range. It doesn't have any max hits anymore though. But the DPS for the Harvester, in terms of the tower, has increased massively from 59.68 to 249.43. Yeah, you're looking at a ground ranger here. So the cost efficiency has decreased from 629.19 to 226.32, and this is also bearing in mind that it has the Thorns ability, which is quite long. The damage has increased from 30 to 40. The range, though, has decreased from 20 to 18, and the duration has decreased from 16 seconds to 6 seconds. But the total elapsed damage has been nerfed from 960 to 480, but the DPS has increased from 60 to 80, and that therefore means that the cost efficiency actually has decreased for this Thorns ability from 625.83 to 705.63. That's an increase, actually. Now, I guess you can see that as a nerf for the Harvester. Like, I don't think that many people would want a ground sniper. But in terms of a Ranger, for example, right? I should really compare it to the Ranger more than the Sniper. I think it actually could be quite a good Ranger-ish ground ranger, because not only can it deal like a load of damage towards high health enemies, but it does have a backup solution if there are hordes, which is its Thorns ability, which is why I think it's been nerfed. Now, many people think that the Harvester is now OP, and I guess it is, given I think the limit for the Harvester is 8, which is that's higher than the Ranger, which is 6, isn't it? My bad. No, the tower limit for the Ranger is 7, whereas for the Harvester it's 5. So yeah, you can't place down as many Harvesters as the Ranger, but I guess if you combine this with the synergy with the farm, yes, this could be a very good ground ranger. And I can see why people think that this is buffed. I think it's been rebalanced, and I can think that the Harvester has gotten more utility as like one of the few ground rangers in Tower Defense Simulator. But you can only have 5 of them, and yes, you can buff them with the DJ booth and the Commander, and it does have a fallback option in terms of its Thorns. So I'm actually thinking about it, maybe if like the map you're playing on doesn't have space for the Rangers, for example, maybe the Harvester can take place of that. Plus the fact that the Harvester tower can actually see hiddens. It can see hiddens at level 5, which it actually, funnily enough, couldn't see hiddens at level 5 previously. So actually, yes, this is a buff. The Ranger can't see hiddens at any level. You need to use an Ace Pilot or UAV to grant it hidden detection. But with that being said, the Harvester can also see flying enemies, but it can't detect lead enemies, which the Ranger can. So yeah, you're messing around with the detection slightly. So the Harvester is not as good in hardcore mode against leads, because it can't, well, damage leads in its entirety. But I think the Thorns can damage lead. Let's test this theory out. So let's spawn in a lead enemy into Tower Defense Simulator. We get the Harvester to place down its Thorns, make sure it's in range because of the changes, and no, it slows it down. Yes, you can see it slow down, but it can't damage leads. So yeah, the Harvester at any level can't damage leads, the Ranger can. But I think hidden detection is the more important detection, and it also has flying detection, which is probably the second most important detection, given the fact that lead only appears in 2 game modes, Pizza Party and Hardcore mode. So yes, it's an interesting rebalance to the Harvester, but I think it has been slightly buffed. Now this leads me on to the Archer, and from face value, it doesn't look like there are actually any changes to the Archer up until level 3, I think. At all of these previous levels, the flame-ish arrow that the Archer provides, it doesn't actually give out any flames, it's just, I guess, there for attention. It all remains the same at the same DPS, 2.34, 2.34, 3.73, and 7.31, respectively, for all of the levels up until level 3. But what has changed about the Archer is that it no longer has flying detection, which is, I think, the most important thing that the Archer has. It was able to detect all 3 detections, technically speaking, because the flame arrows and the explosive arrows can damage leads, but technically speaking, the Archer can't damage leads in like the normal capacity. But through the explosion and through the fire, it can damage leads, whereas now it can only damage leads. It can see hidden still from level 2 onwards, but it can't see flying enemies, which I think reduces the use of the Archer in hardcore mode, because it was a very good tower to use against the hidden enemies, but also the flying enemies. Now, I guess it doesn't make sense, because if you're looking at a balloon, for example, and you were to shoot an arrow at it, it would pop, obviously. That's why the Archer originally did have flying detection. And I think the Archer was one of the original towers that get flying detection, or one of the older towers to get flying detection, alongside like the cliff towers, for example, before they started granting it out to other unrelated towers, such as the Golden Soldier, to give that flying detection. Now, we'll go on to flame arrows to talk about this first, but at level 4, there have been some changes here. So the burn damage has increased from 3 to 4 at this level. There are no other changes, so the total elapsed damage for the archers burn damage at level 4 has increased from 18 to 24. So the DPS for the archer has increased from 16.61 to 18.61, and the cost efficiency going from 291.99 to 260.61. Whereas at level 5, the upgrade cost for the archer has actually increased from 7,375 to 8,575. It's been oddly specific, so you're going from a total cost of all arrows at this level from 12,225 to 13,425. Now, as for the flame arrows, they've actually been buffed in terms of damage, the non-burn element of the arrow, so it's been buffed from 32 to 35. However, to compensate for the damage increase, at level 5 from 32 to 35, the burn damage has decreased from 8 to 6. So in terms of elapsed damage for burn, you're going from 64 to 48. But the DPS has decreased at this level because of that. The burn DPS was actually a big component of that. You're going from 41.44 to 39.82, which previously it was 25.44 normal DPS plus 16 burn DPS, whereas now it is 27.82 normal DPS but 12 burn DPS. So you're going from a cost efficiency of 295 to 337.14. Now, in terms of shock arrows, there are actually no changes at level 4, but at level 5, there are no changes as well, apart from max hits decreasing from 5 to 4, and actually at level 4 there are changes to the archer as well. For the shock arrows, its max hits has been decreased from 4 to 3. The damage though at level 5 has increased from 32 to 35, therefore meaning that the DPS has increased from 25.44 to 27.82. But because of the slight increase in the price of the total price of the archer at level 5, you're going from 480.54 cost efficiency to a slight increase to 482.57, remembering that cost efficiency higher is worse. Meanwhile, as for explosive damage, you'll recall of the damage increase from 32 to 35 at this level. Interesting, very cool. But the splash damage has also been nerfed from 48 to 35. The fire rate remains the same at 1.25. That was the archer's level 5 fire rate anyways. The range remains the same at 24. Explosion range remains the same at 5. And the maximum hits for the arrow is 1. Therefore, the DPS for the archer explosive arrows at level 5 has decreased from 63.6 to 55.64. The cost efficiency going from 192.2 to 241.28. So yes, overall the archer has been nerfed, but I'll be honest, it's not that big of a nerf, and yeah, people could probably complain about this, but it's apart from like, well, I guess they can validly claim about the archer losing its flying detection, so it's not as useful as it was previously. Previously, the archer could pretty much solo not solo hardcore mode, but it could get pretty far in hardcore mode, and was used pretty often, actually, in regular games. But yeah, most of the criticism has been about removing flying detection from the archer. I don't think that's much of a big deal, and logic doesn't really apply to Tower Defense Simulator, because they removed, burn damage, removing ice or freeze abilities. So, you know, the fact that you can burn enemies while they're being frozen, I think that's more of a logical issue, but that benefits us. So logic goes both ways. And just saying, the hardcore archer fanboys, which I was surprised even when the archer wasn't reworked, there were a lot of those. It's that and like the Golden Cowboy, for example. They are complaining in droves about these changes. I'd say at least it's not worse, just put it that way.